Let's rewind and go all the way back to the mid-8th century. China is currently under the rule of the Tang Dynasty, and they're currently engaged in one of China's favorite pastimes, devastating, drawn-out civil war. In 755, the Anlushan Rebellion broke out when a Tang general of the same name took advantage of popular discontent with the Tang Dynasty, which is suffering from repeated failed campaigns to expand and maintain their borders, which are proving to be highly costly. Combine that with other Silk Road nations facing rebellions and uprisings that upended many Central Asian governments, and it's looking like the time is right for some civil war. So at the end of 755, An Lushan rose up with his troops, flipped several Tang generals to his side, and kicked off the An Lushan Rebellion and immediately got cooking. They marched south, capturing Beijing, and soon after capturing the eastern capital of Luoyang, where An Lushan crowned himself the emperor of his new Yan dynasty. An Lushan kept up the momentum and was able to clear a path to the Tang capital of Chang'an through some heavily fortified mountain passes after Tang forces had pulled off a masterclass in self-sabotage, allegedly having the generals in command of Tong Pass executed over court drama with a very influential eunuch. Tang Chancellor Yang Guozhang then ordered the replacement generals to leave their fortified mountain positions and to go down and face Lushan's army in the open field. This went about as well as you'd expect it to. With this defeat, the road to the Tang capital is now wide open and their leadership was on the run. The Yan soon captured the city, displacing and killing hundreds of thousands of people, which is just light work for these civil wars. It was getting pretty hairy for the Tang. The Yan had captured most of northern China, and the Tang troops were absolutely pissed at this blunder, killing Chancellor Guozhang in a mutiny for being so militarily incompetent. But luckily for the Tang, the situation soon stabilized. A new emperor, the Suzong Emperor, had been proclaimed, and the war had entered into a stalemate after the emperor recruited support from Uyghur and Abbasid mercenaries. However, the tide of the rebellion would soon become pinned on a single battle, the Siege of Suyang. But before that, let's check in on An Lushan and his new Yan dynasty. An Lushan's health, both physical and mental, had been declining since the founding of the Yan dynasty. He had become blind, morbidly obese, and extremely irritable and violent, often flogging or just straight up murdering any servants that annoyed him. An Lushan's firstborn son, An Qingzhu, seeing his father's decline along with fears of his father favoring his other son to succeed him, along with even more fear that his father would just straight up murder him, decided to beat his pops to the punch and recruited An Lushan's favorite but abused eunuch to attack and kill him, who infiltrated Lushan's palace and sliced open his stomach, disemboweling the first Yan emperor. Thanks to the help from this dickless shooter, An Qingsu then ascended to the Yan throne and then ordered the Yan armies to besiege and capture the city of Suyang. If Yan forces could take Suyang, it would become their entry point to the fertile, war-untouched southern regions of Tang China, which would provide them with plenty of food and resources to continue their war. The Tang needed to hold the city, no matter the cost, and they needed someone who would do whatever it fucking takes, goddammit! Enter local general and administrator, Zhang Xun. Zhang was fiercely loyal to the Tang dynasty and was currently repelling waves of sieges on the city of Yangzhou, all the while being outnumbered 20-1. However, Yan forces continued capturing nearby cities, slowly encircling Yangzhou, isolating it. At the same time, Suyang administrator Shu Yuan had requested Zhang's aid in the city's defense. Seeing that Yangzhou would soon become impossible to hold, and realizing the strategic importance of Suyang as the entry point to the fertile south, Zhang and 3,000 of his men traveled to Suyang to defend it. The united Zhang and Zhou forces numbered to only around 6,800 men, but this modest force was in for some serious rigmarole, as the attacking Yan army had swelled to around 130,000 strong, and nothing short of a military miracle would be needed to fend off this siege, as the Tang forces were outnumbered 19-1. But as the past has shown, Zhang ain't afraid of no ratio. The Yan would send wave after wave of sieges against Zhang and the Tang, but each attack was repelled. The Tang had to use some real Looney Tunes tactics to gain any advantage they could. They would play battle drums all throughout the night, feigning that they were about to attack, forcing the Yan attackers to stay on guard all night, depriving many soldiers of sleep. Eventually, the Yan attackers started ignoring the false war drums, and once lulled into a false sense of confidence that no attack was actually going to come, Zhang Jun then sent 600 men to attack the Yan in an ambush, eventually killing 5,000 of them in a successful raid. Zhang kept the cartoon shenanigans up and hatched a plan to deal a massive morale blow to the Yan by attempting to off Yan General Yin Juqi. One problem though, Zhang had no idea what Yin looked like. So to determine his identity, Zhang allegedly ordered his archers to swap arrows with weeds and then fire them at the Yan. When the Yan troops saw that weeds were being fired by Tang forces, they thought that this could only mean that the Tang had run out of arrows, and they excitedly ran to go tell General Yin, doxing his location in the process. Zhang saw where they went to report the weed arrows, and then ordered his archers to fire on that position, allegedly hitting Yin in the eye, which caused the besiegers to flee in the chaos, their morale a cooked product for now. But I'm not too sure if this story is true or not, as Yin Zuchi seemingly survived this encounter, as he was still the commander at the end of the siege, and an attack or an injury to Yin isn't mentioned ever again. So I think the story may have been a bit embellished, possibly to make Zhang Shun seem even more like a Giga Chad military genius. But that's just a theory. After 16 days of sieging, Zhang Shun and his Tang defenders had killed around 20,000 Yan troops, but this hard work was soon nullified when Yin retreated and later returned with 20,000 fresh new reinforcements, bringing the siege back to essentially square one. But that's okay. Zhang Shun's military genius and unbreakable will carry them to victory. As long as they have enough food, they can keep the fight going indefinitely. One problem with that though. Originally, Shu Yuan had stored enough food in Suyang to last a year, but that supply was slashed when the district governor had ordered the food supply to be shared with other nearby fortresses, and that year-long food supply had been reduced to around half a year's supply. By July of 757, the 6,800-ish Tang defenders had been reduced to only around 1,600, and famine had begun setting in, with Tang troops only given meager rations of rice to eat, and any other food had to be foraged for by the troops themselves. They would eat anything they could scrape together, mostly being any nearby animals, plants, or insects they could find. Despite the starvation and the loss of manpower, Zhang Shun and his men kept up the fight, repelling every attack wave the Yan sent at them. But despite these continued victories, the situation only continued to get worse, and by August, the men had eaten all the nearby animals, plants, and insects, and shit was looking grim. They had even resorted to eating tree bark and paper. It was pretty fucking bleak. In an attempt to get any kind of support at all, Zhang sent 30 of his best men to break through enemy lines and request aid from the nearby fortresses. All these calls for help were rejected, save for one, as a local governor was convinced to give 3,000 troops to help Zhang defend Suyang. But as they returned, they had to fight their way back into the city, and 2,000 of those 3,000 men were killed in the fighting, leaving only 1,000 troops alive to reinforce Suyang. Shit was dire. Zhang's men were tired, starving, and desperate, and they tried to convince Zhang to surrender or flee, or anything, just to stop the suffering. They were so desperate that many believed that an execution and decapitation at the hands of the enemy would have been a better alternative than this current starvation. Zhang Shun pondered this situation with Shu Yuan, and realizing that giving up would allow the Yan to conquer the south and strengthen themselves, Zhang and Shu then resolved to fight to the bitter end for their dynasty. That's when the cooking started. With no more rations, animals to slaughter, or plants and insects to harvest, Zhang Shun turned to their last available food resource: people. At first, they started eating people who could not contribute to the war effort, meaning women, children, the elderly, and the infirm. In the old book of Tang, Zhang had even reportedly, in an effort to show that extreme sacrifices must be made in this situation, had brought his concubine out before his men, killed her, cooked her body, and forced his men to eat her, saying, "I am not able to cut my own flesh to feed you, but how can I take pity on this woman and just sit by and watch the dangers?" His men cried and were distraught at the grisly scene and were unable to eat her, but Zhang forced them to consume that barbecued side chick. The only citizens who were spared from being eaten were fighting-age men, as they likely were instead conscripted into Shun's forces to defend the city. Soldiers who had fallen in battle also had their corpses eaten. Can't let that free meat go to waste, you know? In the old book of Tang claims that by the fall of Suyang, half the population had been eaten, ranging anywhere from 20,000 to 30,000 people being consumed by Zhang Shun and his men. Although the exact number is disputed, as it's hard to tell how many people were still around by the time the cannibalism started. In October of 757, the number of fighting men in Suyang had fallen all the way down to 400, and this was how many people were even still alive within the city. The population had fallen from around 60,000 to just 400, a 99% loss of life. And these men were so hungry and exhausted, they no longer even had the strength to shoot arrows. Before the city fell for good, Zhang had said, "We are out of strength and can no longer defend the fortress. Although we have failed the emperor in life, we hope to keep killing enemies after death." What an absolute demon. I would not want to go up against this guy. Yan forces then entered the city, and Zhang and Shu were both captured. And according to the Zuchi Tongjiang Chronicles, our old pal One-Eye Yin Zuchi even tried to get Zhang Jun to join the Yan, which I totally understand. I'd want a killer like that on my team too. But he wasn't able to convince him, as Zhang's loyalty to the Tang dynasty hadn't faltered 1 inch, and Zhang Jun and Shun Yuan were executed by Yin. But this victory for the Yan came at a heavy cost, as an estimated 120,000 Yan soldiers had been killed across 400 sieges on Suyang. Goddamn, China, still putting up ungodly kill counts. For reference, the deadliest battle in the American Civil War killed 50,000 at Gettysburg in 1863. This siege killed well over twice that, 11 centuries earlier too. I bowed to the death god. This victory for the Yan was probably the closest you can get to a Pyrrhic victory without being Pyrrhus himself. The Tang had held off the 130,000 strong Yan with less than 1/10 of the Yan fighting force for 10 months, depleting much needed time and resources and manpower for the Yan campaign. And it kept the southern regions of Tang China safe for an extra 2 years, allowing the Tang to regroup and go back on the offensive, having gained the upper hand in terms of equipment and soldiers, as the protected south was able to provide scores of fresh new troops and supplies to the Tang. If the Yan had taken Suyang and broken into the south any earlier, the Tang dynasty may have fallen to the then stronger Yan forces within the 750s, rather than their actual fall date of 907, which would have altered the course of history, as there would have been a full Yan dynasty in Chinese history that could have led into who knows what future for China, making Zhang Xun's decision to cannibalize 30,000 people to hold off the Yan a history-changing moment, up there with some of the greats. Alexander conquers Persia. Qin Shi Huang unites China and starts the First Dynasty. Caesar crosses the Rubicon. Zhang Xun eats 30,000 women, children, and the elderly. All these events have permanently altered history. The Yan weren't long for this world after this, and after a series of assassinations, internal conflicts, and usurpations, the Yan were disjointed and had no clear central ruler to all rally around, and the An-Lushan rebellion came to an end in 763, with the suicide of the last Yan emperor Shi Chaoyi, and the Yan dynasty dying along with him. By the end of the An-Lushan rebellion, sources claim anywhere from 13 million to 36 million people may have been killed, but it's hard to tell for sure, as the death tolls were determined by comparing census records both pre- and post-rebellion, as 8th century Tang officials weren't too eager to write up official death reports and casualty counts, but the numbers may be inflated due to breakdown in census accuracy, as the rebellion had devastated Tang infrastructure and society, which likely resulted in less accurate and thorough census surveys. But based on my knowledge of how devastating these Chinese civil wars can get, go see the Taiping Rebellion for a clear example. And based off of harrowing reports of massive battles and destruction throughout the war, I think it's a safe bet to say at least several million, anywhere from 1 to 10, had died over the course of the 7-year rebellion. And with that, the story of Zhang Xun comes to a close. Zhang Xun to this day remains a controversial figure in Chinese history. Some see his defense of the Tang until the ultimate bitter end as the main effort that led them to defeat the Yan and preserve Tang authority, while others condemn him for his, unorthodox eating habits. And I think this is an interesting question to leave on. What do you think of Zhang Xun? Did his human buffet justify the ends? Or is this guy no better than a supercharged 8th century Hannibal Lecter with a sycophantic loyalty to an ailing empire? Let me know what you think. And thank you so very much for watching. This next video will be another long-form video game video, but if you guys like these history videos, I'd love to do more of these smaller ones, and maybe we can get out of just taking a look at China. I get a kick out of their history, and I feel a lot of crazy interesting Chinese histories are glossed over and ignored, which shouldn't be the case, as China's history is in a complete league of its own, for better and for worse. I mean, they were getting into civil wars with less efficient weapons and still put up death tolls that made the Civil War look like a skirmish in comparison. In the 8th century. It's just fascinating. Well, that's all I got for you today. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.